Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to a book exchange edition of Grammaticus Books. So what is a book exchange? Well, it was an idea that was come up with by Jim over on Mystery and Mayhem on his fantastic channel. Jim, as the name of his channel indicates, focuses on noir detective fiction novels and mystery novels. And of course, I focus here on Grammaticus Books on vintage science fiction and vintage fantasy books. And we're always watching each other's videos, and we're always saying to each other, that's a great detective novel, Jim. Or he's saying, hey, Grammaticus, that sounds like a great science fiction novel. And finally, Jim goes, well, why don't we do a book swap? Let's do a book exchange. I'll recommend for you a mystery novel, and you recommend for me a science fiction novel. And I'm like, Jim, that's a fantastic idea. Let's make it happen. So today we're both putting up our book swap novels here. So after you watch my video, go to Jim's channel. I will link it down below and check out his review of the science fiction book that I recommended over for him. So what book did Jim recommend to me over here on Grammaticus Books? Well, he recommended this one right here, a 1982 detective novel called 8 Million Ways to Die by Lawrence Block. Now, this is a library book. As you can see, it's a large print library book. It was the only version that was available out of my library system. And just a quick aside about libraries, whenever I'm reading an author that I've not read before, or whenever I'm recommending to you guys an author that you're not familiar with, I always strongly urge you, go use your local library. Before you spend your hard-earned cash, go out and get the book from your local library and check it out that way before you put some skin in the game. But in this case, the skin was well invested, even though there is no skin in a library book. But this is an excellent book. It's a good read. We're going to get into it here on the channel. Now, what book did I recommend to Jim over on his channel? I recommended Ringworld by Larry Niven, which is just an absolutely seminal science fiction book. But in retrospect, looking back on it, it might not be the best science fiction book to recommend for somebody just getting their feet into, or just starting off with science fiction. That one's a book that people tend to either really love it or really not love it. And there's not usually a whole lot of in between. I'm hoping Jim loved Ringworld, but go check out his video to find out whether he did or not. But this book right here, this is 1982, Lawrence Block. He's a mystery writer. He's a prolific mystery writer. And this is part of his Matthew Scudder series. Matthew Scudder is a detective out of the New York Police Department who quits after he has a shooting incident that goes badly for him. He quits the police department and he becomes an alcoholic. And he's working in New York City as a private investigator, an unlicensed private investigator. And there are 19 of these Matthew Scudder novels. This is book number 5, and 8 Million Ways to Die is probably one of the most popular and well-known of his Matthew Scudder series. They actually turned this book into a movie in 1986, starring Jeff Bridges and Rosanna Arquette. Now, the movie, I looked this movie up, and on Rotten Tomatoes, under the critics score, it had a critics score of 0.0 on Rotten Tomatoes, and the audience score was 39%. I had intended to check it out and watch it, but with those terrible scores on Rotten Tomatoes, like, you know what? I think I'm going to give that one a pass. But fortunately, this book here is better than that movie appears to be. If anybody out there has seen that movie and has impressions on it, please put it down in the comments section below. I would love to hear about that movie with Jeff Bridges and Rosanna Arquette from 1986. But this book here was also adapted into a graphic novel that looks like it was actually a pretty good graphic novel. So what is this particular story about, this Matthew Scudder? Well, again, it's Matthew Scudder is a PI working in New York City, and he is approached by a lady of the night, a call girl named Kim, who wants to get out of the business. And her pimp, who is named Chance, who is running her prostitute ring, she's slightly afraid of him, but can't really voice why. But she would like Matthew Scudder to go and intervene for her with her pimp and have him agree to let her out of the life. Scudder agrees. He takes the job. He meets with Chance the pimp. Chance is not your ordinary pimp. He's not a cardboard cutout character. He's very sophisticated. He's very cultured. He's very well educated. And he agrees right away. And he says, yeah, it would have been no problem. She should have just told me herself. She's free to go anytime she wants. But then 48 hours after Chance agreeing to let Kim leave the prostitute ring, she's found hacked to death in a hotel room with a machete. And the prime suspect, of course, is Chance. And at this point, you think that this is going to become a revenge novel. But then in the following chapters, and I'm not giving away very much here, this is all just in the setup of the book. This happens in the very start of the book. Chance comes and he hires Matthew Scudder to find the killer while he's the main suspect. And the book takes off from there. And it is, I would describe this as very, very dark detective fiction. Almost grimdark might be a little bit too much, a little bit too excessive of a description of it. There's very little humor in here. There's very little lightheartedness within the writing. It's a very gripping novel, but it is just as much a book that is a study in how to run the business logistics of being a pimp, running a prostitute ring in New York City, as much as it is a detective novel. And it also goes into an equal depth what it is like to be an alcoholic and how you have these struggles as an alcoholic. Because Matthew Scudder, in order to cope with this bad shooting that he was involved in, turns to alcoholism. And he's not just an alcoholic, he's a raging alcoholic. To the point where that if he picks up alcohol again, he's probably going to drink himself to death. And Lawrence Block goes into great detail with the rationalizations that Matthew Scudder comes up with as to why he should have a drink, why it won't hurt him to have a drink, why he deserves to have a drink, and then all of the things that Matthew Scudder does in order to prevent himself from taking that drink. And quite a bit of this book here, 8 Million Ways to Die, takes place in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And it's a fascinating character study here with Matthew Scudder that Lawrence Block has put together. Lawrence Block himself started writing novels in the 1950s. He was an absolutely prolific author. In addition to these 19 Matthew Scudder PI series that he also has a very well-known series, another well-known series, where he writes about a gentleman burglar in New York City that supposedly is a lot more lighthearted than his Matthew Scudder series. And in fact, I think I may have to check out one of those novels. So thank you, Jim, for turning me on to Lawrence Block. I really appreciate that. But Lawrence Block, prolific author, like I said, 19 of these Matthew Scudder novels, starts writing in the 1950s, and he starts writing soft porn novels. Yes, he starts doing salacious novels in the 1950s, although by today's standards, what he was writing back then probably wouldn't even hardly rate an R rating in a movie theater if you translate it into a movie script today. I'm sure it was very, very, very soft by today's standards. But he credits that those early salacious novels that he was cranking out, he credits them with teaching him how to put together books, how to write books quickly, how to write books efficiently, and how to write them with a minimal of editing, which permitted him to turn out 19 of these and about 19 of those gentleman burglar novels and a whole slew of other novels over the course of his career to have just an enormous bibliography, and he's enormously popular. So this book was very good. As I'm reading it, it's a whodunit book, and I'm reading this book and I'm getting involved in it, and there's a limited number of characters that he is dealing with, that Matthew Scudder is going out and talking to. So I'm like, all right, my list of suspects is rather short. It's rather narrow, and I think I've figured it out. And then I was convinced that I'd figured out who or multiple who's who had committed this murder. And then we got to the end of the book. Matthew Scudder is revealing who the murderer or murderers are. And I'm like, wait a minute, that can't be right. I'm going to have to raise the BS flag on this one. But then Matthew Scudder starts to explain it, and I'll be danged if all of the clues were there right along. Lawrence Block just doesn't pull something out of the thin air, out of left field and throw it at you. It is actually very well planned out. And looking back on all the clues as Matthew Scudder's revealing them, I had to admit that, yeah, it was all there. That conversation, this piece of information, there are 5 or 6 of them that are dropped throughout the book that all tie in together. They all make sense within the context of what's going on. It's not just out of left field. And it was very well done. And I missed it. And all that information was right there, right in front of me. But it was very subtle. You had to really look in between the clues to piece it together. And that's always a sign of a good mystery novel, because this one here is, in fact, a good detective novel. And speaking of detective novels, I tend to try to shy away from them. And one of the reasons I shy away from detective novels is because they have a tendency to irritate me. They have a tendency to irritate me because they often get it so wrong, and some of the things that they do are very outrageous. Lawrence Block in here does not do any of those transgressions. It's well written from a professional perspective. He actually gives out two really good pieces of advice during the book that struck me as he's either talked to actual detectives or he's done a lot of research, which if you're a famous and popular and prolific author of detective novels, I imagine you would. And one is, if you knock on enough doors, good things happen. And that is absolutely 100% correct. If you knock on enough doors, good things will happen. You'll eventually get to talk to somebody who knows somebody else, who's going to get you to the persons that you need, and you start getting the information that you like. And the other piece of good advice that he gives out here in the book that struck me as very authentic was, if you have any type of exposure, this is P.I. Scudder talking to Chance, he goes, you need to stop talking to the police and hire a good criminal defense attorney. And that is excellent advice. Now, I am not an attorney. Do not take anything that I am saying here as any type of legal advice. This is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, find an attorney. But what I am saying is that is, from my perspective, in my opinion, with my background, that is excellent, excellent advice. If you have any type of exposure at all, do not talk to the police and find yourself a good criminal attorney and follow their advice. Again, I am not an attorney. Do not construe this as any type of legal consulting. It is not. This is merely my opinion. I would add one other thing to that. The other thing I would add to that is, when the police come and knock on your door, be polite. Be polite. And why should you be polite? People who are interviewing you or interrogating you? A very simple, very straightforward reason. And that reason is because detectives, special agents, criminal investigators are just like the rest of hardworking Americans. They are overworked and underpaid. So the next morning when they're coming into their office and they're looking at their caseload and there's too many cases for them to work, which I guarantee you is the case with almost every single criminal investigator out there, they have more cases assigned to them than they can physically work. If you were an idiot when you were talking to that criminal investigator or special agent or detective, if you irritated that person, the next day when they're in their office trying to decide who's going to get their extra special attention, well, guess who just went up to the top of their list? That's right, you did. So that is why you're always polite. But that is it. That's my review here of Lawrence Block. It was very good. 8 Million Ways to Die. It was a very good, dark, gritty detective novel. It had an excellent ending to it with all the clues that were put out there for you to find, and you can actually connect the dots if you're paying attention, better attention than I did. My distraction, Lawrence Block successfully distracted me and dangled bait out there, which led me to overlook some good clues that he strung throughout the book that you can find if you're a careful reader. And I thank Jim for recommending this book. This was a good recommendation, Jim. I hope you enjoyed Ringworld as much as I enjoyed this book here. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.